My tactics were flawless, and yet my forces lie decimated.
Because you left your beastman exposed to his chaos dwarf.
Prepare, knave, to...
Call me knave again.
Tune up. Level up your fun. Tune up. Your quest has now begun. Tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up. Tune up. Tune up. Tune up.
Well, friends, we are back for another episode of Tabletop Tune-Up. My name is Ben Dyer. I'm here with my co-host, Mark Lehman.
Hey, everybody. How are we doing today?
I think they're probably doing great because you know what happened on Sunday, Mark?
What was that?
GenCon released its event schedule. So everybody is shopping for all those convention games that they're going to want to go try out.
Yeah. Ben, we had some fun in years past at some of the one-shot conventions. Yeah?
Yeah, we did all kinds of, I think we did a couple different conventions. We did this more than once, didn't we?
We've done it a few times.
Yeah.
And we have played some convention games. You've actually ran some convention games, right?
Yeah. Once upon a time, when I was living, I think in Chicago, didn't have a lot of spare money to get to the convention. There's a deal where if you run games, if you run a certain number of games, they'll spot you your convention badge. Now, that doesn't pay for travel expenses, hotel, anything like that. But
hey, they didn't check to see if these were good games. They just said if you ran a game.
That's right.
But we're gonna try to help you out today, though.
Oh, okay.
I'm segueing this one.
Well done.
We're going to try to help you out today with your one-shots, your convention games, so that when you go to these conventions for your free ticket to GenCon, you don't go completely unprepared, right?
That's right. We're interested in convention games, but also I think we want to include in this category like one-shot games or short games, maybe like 1 to 3 sessions. Essentially, things that are short, they're not like intended to be big, long campaigns. And so you've got to have a different kind of way of thinking about how you're going to put this together.
Yeah, and these are often games that we're going to be, you're running in a public place oftentimes at a game shop. Obviously a convention hall is loud and rowdy. So there are all sorts of things to consider when running these games. So let's kind of get into this. Ben, what is it about these convention games other than the free ticket? What's kind of gratifying about this?
Yeah, no, they are a different kind of animal. And speaking of one-shots or short games, the first thing I think is great about these is that they let you try out a game without committing to it long-term.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if you've got people that are like super into D&D, they might not want to do a lot of other stuff, but you can try things out maybe sometimes if you keep it short.
When we went, we didn't play anything that we had ever been, familiar with. We tried everything new because we wanted to try out new systems. And this is the place to do it. Like, I don't know these games. It might take me a long time to get up to speed on the rules. But if somebody's graciously going to host a game for maybe in the 3-hour investment, hey, I'm in.
Yeah, I definitely, when I go to conventions, if I'm playing a game, I definitely want to play something that is just not in my usual wheelhouse, both to experiment and discover new games, but also just because I want to actually see how these games are when you're not reading them out of a book.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great opportunity. Also, for your home groups, if you've got like a long running campaign and you're between big story arcs, or maybe somebody's absent and maybe people are just a little burnt out, you need to kind of switch gears for a minute. It's a great opportunity to do a short game.
Yeah. Sometimes, the absent thing is something that happens a lot where you maybe got a big group of people, one person can't make it. And somebody says, hey, I can do a one-shot next week. Everybody's in. That's great. Make it happen. But another thing too is like I ran a lot of not convention games, but they were learn to play games. This was at a local club that people would come in, had never played Dungeons and Dragons before, and it was a social thing. And so that was kind of fun. Just had that community you could kind of build from. Yeah. And that's one of the things I found when I was running those types of games.
Something else that's coming up too, besides Gen Con, before Gen Con, is Free RPG Day. I think it's on June 21st. And so there may be an opportunity if you're working with your local friendly neighborhood game store to run a game for them. And who knows, maybe you can get some swag, or they'll make you a deal on a book you've been saving up for.
That's a great idea. You know what? There's all sorts of people who want to play games. So if you do run a game, invite some noobs, bring them in. We need more people in the hobby. So,
well, and that gets to a really neat point too, is if you want to run a familiar game, I mean, you should be probably running, if you're going to run a convention game, you want to run a familiar game, one that one that you can execute, one that you're comfortable, editing and working through. We'll talk about how to execute that game in a little bit. But one of the things that's neat about running a well-known game is if it's a game that maybe doesn't get as much representation as you'd like, this is a way for you to build a community and to find that group maybe that wants to try this out with you.
That is true. And when all else fails, Ben, go get those free convention tickets.
Well, and let's come to the important part. That's right. What's great is that most conventions will do this. I've been to big conventions and small conventions, and they've all got kind of like a GM your way to a ticket kind of a deal. Yeah. So it's not a bad way to go.
All right. Well, what do you want to go when you go to these things? Because you've actually ran them at conventions. Mm-hmm. What do you come prepared with? Do you bring pre-generated characters, or how do you organize them to make characters?
Yeah, boy, there's a lot here, right? So with short games like this, especially with one-shots and convention games where you're probably not playing with your regular group, I would say you need to have a really tight plan. And part of having a tight plan is knowing the characters are going to play in this game intimately. Now, there are such things as organized play. If you're playing D&D or Pathfinder, or there's other systems that have organized play leagues. And in those cases, there's going to be sort of specific requirements for what kind of characters people can bring into an organized play game. But if you're basically running your own game and it's going to be this 1 4-hour block at a convention or an evening at a game store, then you probably want to make pre-generated characters, because that means you know everything about them. You built them specifically for the encounters and the moments you've got in your campaign. And the players aren't going to be here for the long haul. They don't know maybe how this game works, so they might not be ready to build characters in a system that they're not familiar with. So it gives you a way to kind of isolate a whole lot of uncertainties and variables that if you had people try to make characters and then play a game, who knows?
Then I do want to give one little caveat. Maybe it's advice for if you're running these games. As a player, leave enough empty on the character sheet that they can kind of fill in some stuff on their own.
Absolutely.
That could be character names, maybe a few little character quirks and traits. Don't flesh them out so much that they don't have anything to bring of their own.
Yeah, and a kind of a related point here, right? When we're saying, the way I think of it is just with the phrase, don't overbuild the characters. Mm-hmm. So don't give them like a 3-page backstory. They're going to be used for one evening. Keep their capabilities and all of their little tricks and things like that, the things that the character can do, keep those pretty straightforward and take advantage of the tropes of the genre, right? If you're going to play a pulp game for an evening, you better believe if somebody signed up for a pulp game, somebody's going to want to play that intrepid archaeologist. Someone's going to want to play the dashing aviator. There's a whole bunch of these characters that everybody kind of knows who they are and what they can do. And gosh, if you throw a whip onto the archaeologist, everybody's going to know exactly how that's supposed to work and what you use it for. So make the characters easy to get into in terms of their capabilities.
Now I didn't run convention games, so I didn't really run into that as much, but I did run weekly, learn to play games. And I did ask that people come with the character, and I would often, apply a link to D&D Beyond. I just say, hey, make a first level character. I didn't really care what it was. It could have been anything. The reason why I did it that way is because they were specifically playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And one of the things that makes that game magical is building your character. And I didn't really want to get in the way of that. Did it have some issues with maybe some skills not being covered? Yeah, sure. But it was a one-shot. I'm not going to sweat it.
Yeah, that's a good note. I'll say, too, there's other games that character generation might actually be pretty darn fast. You and I have been playing this Broken Compass game, and you remember character generation for that was pretty fast. It was pick a couple tags, write all your stuff down, choose a couple keywords.
You could even speed some of this up by like maybe making a card game out of it where you flip a card over and you pick one of the three and you start assembling it. And now you've got a deck, which is your character. There's ways you can simplify character creation. Or I did have a game where we were playing all barred musical kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could literally just lay cards out with the instruments and say, what instrument do you want to play? You turn it over and that's your character.
That's fantastic.
There's ways you can shortcut this.
I think of it almost like user experience design, like the way people put together websites and stuff.
So you've got some idea about how you want to, maybe have some pre-gens or, shortcutted character creation. And now we're like getting into like crafting a story for a convention. What are we trying to do here? Like, what is our goal, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, you could have a few different kind of goals, right? Depending on how you want to present the game to either your group or to the convention in the description. And you'll find this if you look at convention catalogs, they'll say, hey, this is an intro game where you're going to learn to play the game. Or you'll see people say, hey, this is a crazy fun, romp. Don't be too serious. Or you'll see other people say, plan for a significant adventure or whatever.
Yeah, and this is a little different. This convention is a little different than, say, the kind of scenario we mentioned earlier about like, hey, we're doing a filler for a game session with your friends. Like, we can kind of get past a lot of the what the goal is. We already know what it is. We're having a one shot because we just want to have fun for a night when we can't play our main campaign. So your goal at a convention might be to teach somebody a game, right?
It could be that. It could be, again, kind of like the beer and pretzels fun. It could be, other kinds of things as well, just a regular straight ahead version of that game. One thing I think would be smart to do, and I like this is a point you made earlier when we were sort of putting our notes together, is build the kind of story that showcases what this game is about. If you're going to have a cyberpunk game, make sure there's some cybernetics, make sure there's some betrayal, make sure there's some tech. Have some fun with that. Have some big moments. Not meaning necessarily big in the sense of long, but just really try to bring out what that game's about.
Emphasize that game. What makes that game great? So if you're playing a pulp game, really ham up the pulpiness to it.
Yeah.
Go a little overboard because you got to kind of hit these marks for a one shot. You don't have a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of hitting the marks, think about how long of a block you've got. In different conventions, you might have different size blocks. Or if you're doing this maybe at a local game store, or if you're doing this on a regular game night that you have, you'll know if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe, whatever it might be.
GenCon, almost all of our games are 3-hour blocks. Is that right?
They're 4-hour blocks, yeah.
4-hour blocks.
It's possible to do less.
The thing is, we won the game in 3 hours, so,
Well, yeah. We won, yeah. Well, so that's the thing is figure out what kind of size your game block is, if it's going to be 4 or 6 or 3 or whatever it might be. And then you need to know enough about the game system you're running that you know about how long it takes you, not everybody, but you specifically, to get through a certain number of encounters. Like how many encounters would fit into that space? And then you need to build your story to fit that number and stay really focused on that.
Okay. So thinking about that time and the limited time you have, you want to like craft out these moments and these, this story. You want to fit that story into that time block. So
yeah,
just
have
think
some
about that.
Big showstoppers. It doesn't mean everything has to be combat encounters or everything's got to be one or another. Like build the kind of story you usually build, but you may have to just actually have smaller ambitions.
I was going to say, you just can't afford to have like an intro that's dragging out because you want to start big and just keep going.
Yeah, that's right. You better move fast, but also think about how not to make something so big that it becomes unwieldy or that it's going to go strange places. So for example, if you're going to do a mystery, a lot of times players really dawdle and have to kind of wander around in a mystery kind of story. So like if you're going to do a mystery, have those clues ready and put it on rails. If you're going to do an action sort of story, like make sure that the action is explosive and amazing and it can be resolved pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think a mystery would be, well, from the conventions I've been to, that would be incredibly difficult because the noise level at these places sometimes can be
intense.
You don't really understand until you're there. It's like a background engine, going off behind you, and it's always there.
Yeah.
So if you're lucky, you can get some rooms off to the side where it's a little bit more manageable. But on the main floor, woo.
Yeah, it can be something. The other thing, in addition to building a story with big moments that's really memorable, is build important moments or contributions for each character. Make sure every player that plays that game has at least one moment where their character can shine and they do something really interesting. This is really easy to do if you're using pre-gens, because after all, you'll know what all those characters' capabilities are. You can actually craft encounters and challenges for the particular characters that are going to be in that group.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And you want to do this at a regular table as well, but at a convention, you want to show the players what those characters can do given the system that you're trying to showcase for them.
So let's actually talk about time for a moment, because that's the other part that goes into how you're planning this story out. So time management is the big thing when you're doing these games. And the first best thing I could tell you about time management is keep a clock nearby or visible, whether it's your phone or a watch, or heck, just get a timer and bring that with you. But whatever it is, you want to have a clock nearby so that you're always kind of keeping an eye on it, and you're always planning for encounters to kind of finish on time. So if you have 4 encounters and you got 4 hours, maybe the first 2 encounters will be done in the first hour. Maybe the second encounter will take 90 minutes and the third encounter will take 90 minutes, and there you go. There's your 4 hours, right?
Yeah, and if you're kind of getting close to that time, just dip into your GM toolbox and figure out ways to kind of wrap things up for that encounter. Maybe you're in an encounter. This is maybe where the remaining creatures flee. Maybe somebody drops a spell and you give it a little extra oomph just to kind of wrap up that encounter and say, okay, we got to move on because we're limited on time.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to say that. You don't really want to pretend as though the time is not there, but just move that game along in all the ways and the tricks and traits that you have as a GM to keep it moving along.
Well, and that's another good point about actually designing the story is, as you're designing the story and crafting that beforehand, like create little trapdoors for yourself. Like if we're running behind at this point, I can just omit that stuff over there, or I can make this a skill challenge that we'll just do. I don't have to kind of go into the actual role playing of that thing, So
yeah, by making those little trapdoors, you've given yourself precious moments. And that's what you need time in this game.
Yeah. You're also going to have to read the room when you're there, though. So your players that you're playing with, you've never played with them before if it's a convention game. Obviously, if it's your local house game, you have. But like if it's a game store, you might not have. So, you don't know maybe sometimes whether the players are going to be overly cautious or what you're going to need to do. So have ready some tricks to help move things forward. And then the other thing I would say is when you're not sure whether or not you should make a cut, if you're in the middle of it, err on the side of giving yourself more time in the late game, because if you can't extend that time, then, there's nowhere to go, right? You've got to leave yourself plenty of room to get that later stuff done if things are taking more time than you thought.
All right. And guys, I'll tell you one thing about conventions. They're a lot of fun. They're exhausting. You're there late. Maybe if you're of an age, you might be having some libations, having a good time. And, you might be very, very tired the next day.
If you're of a certain age, you might be especially tired the next day.
So you're going to need rest because you got to have energy for these things. You cannot go into these games, tired, bedraggled. This, as you say, Ben, this is a sprint, not a marathon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the thing about convention games is to keep that pace going, to land that thing on time, players feed off your energy. So if you're like, hey, let's go, let's do it. What are you going to do? They're going to pick that up and they're going to get moving. And if you feel like you're kind of just sitting back waiting for them to kind of move the story along and you're just kind of, if your energy flags and you're kind of just waiting, like they're going to read that too. And then they're going to slow down. So energy and keeping your energy up is a really important part of success here.
What are some of the big differences that one shot that you've seen?
So here's some other stuff that I think are interesting. When you're playing with strangers in a convention game or with the local game store, remember that you're going to have random players and you're not playing at home probably. So you're going to have limited materials. So whatever you can bring with you, and you could design a really amazing adventure and then realize that means you've got 6 maps and 50 miniatures and 12 books, and that's going to be just a pain. So
yeah, you don't have your home field advantage there.
That's right. Do yourself a favor and make something that's got maybe 1 or 2 maps. You can do a couple of things with theater of the mind. Maybe you don't need lots of miniatures. You just need like, I don't know, a dozen or something easy.
Hey, one thing I do, we didn't really talk about this, but this is something we should have brought up, but I'm going to bring it up because this happened quite a bit at a lot of the one-shots and stuff I ran.
Yeah.
First of all, you have very diverse age ranges.
Mm-hmm.
You could have older players, you get younger players. Sometimes you have people with their kids as well.
Yeah.
So you have children oftentimes at these games. So, think about that. Like, be upfront. Say maybe this game isn't for kids to be here if you're not comfortable with that at the table. But do keep in mind sometimes people bring their children and they want to play too. So be prepared for that if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you're playing with strangers, you're going to play with strangers from all walks of life. You're going to play with strangers from different generations. You might find that sitting down at your table is somebody that's been playing the same system you're about to run a game in, and they've been doing it for many years more than you have. And you might find that they're sitting down at the same table with somebody who's brand new and doesn't know how this all works. You're going to have to, serve and entertain both of their needs simultaneously. And so that can be challenging too.
So if your NPC, Karnak, the cursor, is spewing out all sorts of F-bombs, and you all of a sudden, realize that there's kids at the table, well, maybe you didn't design that game very well for random, quote, random people. So think about your content as well.
Interesting. So at these kind of games, you're going to have random players. You're going to have limited access to materials. It also kind of matters what kind of convention you're going to. So RPG conventions like GenCon might be a little bit different from board game conventions like Origins. And then there's other conventions. There's like the local conventions you might have in town. There's a couple here in Denver, for example. So the crowd's going to be different according to what you're doing. Just calibrate your expectations accordingly. Show up ahead of time. I would be at your table like easily 15 minutes ahead.
Yeah.
And you want to have time to set up comfortably, to welcome the players that are coming to your table, and to really host them the way that you'd want to be hosted.
Bring extra material too. Like if you're making pre-gen characters, make a stack of the same character because sometimes people want to take them home with them as kind of a token from the convention. Don't just have one, character sheet. You want them to go home with them. Really
true. If you can, do a practice run with your local group. One way to figure out timing and to prepare for this thing is to get your local friends and sit down and run the game. Figure out if you're maybe an encounter short or an encounter long.
Or you can also get valuable feedback of what they liked and what they didn't like. They could maybe tell you, hey, you got to, punch that villain up a little bit or this and that. What a great way to...
That puzzle was too obscure.
100%. Yeah. So that's a good idea, Ben.
Wonderful. One other quick thing about conventions is they often will let you define how many players can join that game. Some players out there, some GMs are very liberal and they're going to say, I'm happy with 8 players in my table. Friends, don't have that many players. I mean, for any game, really, what are you thinking? But no, seriously, keep it manageable at a convention. Don't try to, invite people just because it's a con. You probably will have people show up to your game when you've got a full table and go, oh, hey, could I join too? And they're looking for a game and you'll want to say yes, but friends, you need to be stony hearted.
Yeah. You might even have people looky-looing and just watching, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So some great stuff here. What else do you have?
Last thing here, the golden rule is run the game you'd want to play in at a convention. Focus on that core gameplay. Give people that experience that if they've never played it before, then this is their chance to try this thing out in its best and most authentic form.
Yeah. And it's also really important that you're having fun. At the end of the day, your enjoyment of this story you're telling or your game, even if you've told it, 5 or 6 times in a convention, have fun with it, man. It's that if you're having a good time, it's going to spread to them. They're going to have a good time.
I think so. And it's such a charge, doing convention games, doing one shots because of the high stakes, because you've got to really have high energy and you're delivering this for strangers. It can be a really, really great experience. It's like nothing else in our hobby.
All right. Well, I hope you guys who are going to conventions, hope you have a great time at them. But right now, we got ourselves a tune-up. Ben, you dropped this tune-up, didn't you?
I actually saw this on a message board, and somebody asked a question for a lot of GMs, and I thought it was a great question, so I thought we would appropriate it here. Mark, question for you is, if you could give your past self advice about GMing, what would it be?
Oh boy, that is a big one. I hadn't really thought about it until you asked it right now. I thought it would be an easy one, but this is a challenge, man. I don't know.
You don't have to pick just one thing.
I would say, and this is something it took me too long to learn, let things go.
Oh, yeah.
Like, let the little things go. Don't get swept up in your stories so much that you can't let them get swept up in their character. If I'm asking people and changing their character because of something I want for the story, then it's my story. It's not their story.
Right.
Let them have fun and explore that character.
Yeah, I think I would say something very similar, and maybe I can kind of put a little variation on it, but just it's okay if the thing you were intending doesn't come off if the players had a good time. And, if you had certain kind of goals, I remember when I was very early on, I was like, well, my job as a GM is to challenge the players.
Yeah.
And so if the players were clever and they, one-shotted my villain, or they, bypassed a challenge or something like that, I'd try to figure out a way as a GM to kind of cheese it and really put them back in that box. And it was not a good practice. That was something that made people unhappy with that game.
I want to give the audience just a really good example of what you just said right there.
Uh-oh. Is it something I did you once?
No, you 100% young Ben would have tried to force them into a scenario. But we had a game session just last week where here's the GM. I know the GM had this whole idea that he was going to have this Indiana Jones kind of scene where the players are in this pit and the villain was going to take what was theirs and run off to the city with it. And we were supposed to follow them, right? That was the design.
Plan A, let's call it.
Yeah. Well, that plan went out the window when the players outsmarted the GM. Well, we're going to say we did.
Listen, if you choose to think that, that's fine.
We reversed the situation where we ended up being the people out of the pit. And now young Ben would have said, oh no, I can't let that happen because I need this chase scene. Yeah. Well, we did have a chase scene. It was just them chasing us instead of us chasing them. And it was just as fun.
Yeah, that was a great time.
Yeah. So that's a great example of how old Ben has succeeded where young Ben would have failed.
Yeah. Well, we grow eventually, friends.
All right. Well, I guess our next advice we're going to give to everybody is to tune in next week or in 2 weeks.
We're
going to be dropping another exciting episode of Tabletop Tune-Up.
And until then, friends, keep those dice rolling.
Quest has now begun. Tune up. We'll show you how it's done. Tune up. Tune up. Tune up. Tune Your quest has now begun. Tune up. We'll show tune